You know, some fates in the Imperium are actually worse than death. And I'm not talking about execution, not being consumed by tyrannids, or, even being dragged screaming into the warp. No, across a million worlds, countless citizens face a punishment so completely horrifying that Imperial records barely even describe it. It's a punishment where your body survives, your mind survives, but your humanity, that does not. If you look at scattered Mechanicus archives, penal records, and witness accounts from hive worlds, you see that millions of people literally just disappear every single year into these facilities. And they never return. Officially, they're just being repurposed. Officially, they're being made useful. Officially, they become servitors. But there's one massive question that Imperial authorities almost never answer. What actually happens during the process? And well, more importantly, how much of the victim is still alive afterward? It's a terrifying thought because some witnesses out there claim they saw something that should be absolutely impossible. They saw fear. So the Imperium of Man basically runs on sacrifice, right? Every single day, billions are laboring in factories, mines, manufacturums, shipyards, and these massive war industries that literally span entire planets. The scale is, well, it's almost impossible to comprehend. A single forge world might pump out enough weapons to arm entire sector armies, and a hive city can have a population measured in the tens of billions. So maintaining a civilization like that requires labor on a scale totally unmatched in human history. But labor creates a problem. Workers get tired, they make mistakes, sometimes they rebel and machines break. Now you might be thinking, what about AI? Well, artificial intelligence is strictly forbidden. The memory of the ancient men of iron still heavily haunts humanity, even thousands of years later. The Imperium flat out refuses to trust true thinking machines, yet they still desperately need endless automated labor. So the Mechanicus found another rather grim solution. Instead of creating intelligent machines, they just transformed humans into machines. If you look at it from the cold perspective of imperial bureaucracy, the logic kinda appears simple. A criminal sentenced to death contributes nothing. A political dissident, nothing. A debtor, an injured worker, a failed soldier, they contribute absolutely nothing. But if you convert that individual into a servitor, suddenly they can work for centuries. We're talking no wages, no complaining about the food, no unions, zero rebellion, and absolutely no rights. Just pure, unadulterated obedience. But the nightmare, that begins long before the cybernetic implants even show up. Now, a lot of people just imagine servitors as criminals receiving some kind of ultimate punishment. And yeah, sometimes that's true, but the reality is far, far darker. Imperial records suggest servitors come from literally countless sources. We're talking convicted criminals, political prisoners, captured rebels, failed workers, even unwanted populations and bankrupt citizens. Throw in religious offenders and military deserters too. And sometimes it's just people guilty of almost nothing at all. On some of the more brutal worlds, local governors have actually been accused of meeting their labor quotas by simply condemning everyday citizens through totally fabricated charges. Because honestly, who's gonna investigate? The Imperium spans a million worlds, justice is wildly inconsistent, life is incredibly cheap, and production is literally everything. So that raises a really disturbing possibility. How many servitors were actually criminals, and how many were just inconvenient? Official records get surprisingly vague on this, and that's exactly where the mystery really begins. See, once an individual enters these servitor processing facilities, reliable information becomes extremely scarce. The witnesses who have spoken up describe these massive industrial complexes hidden deep beneath forge worlds. They talk about giant conversion chambers, grim medical theaters operated by tech priests, and just endless rows of restrained prisoners waiting for transformation. Most of them never leave. Well, at least not as human beings. The process itself is kept intentionally, intensely secretive. But a few fragments of information do survive, and it's enough to paint a truly horrifying picture. So the victim is restrained, sedated in some cases, but utterly conscious in others. Then begins this brutal, systematic removal of whatever the Mechanicus considers unnecessary. Memory gone. Personality gone. Independent thought, emotion, identity all stripped away. The goal here isn't merely cybernetic enhancement, right? The goal is obedience. Absolute unquestioning obedience. And what makes servitors so uniquely terrifying is that death is absolutely not the objective. The body has to continue functioning. The brain must continue functioning. Certain neural pathways have to remain active so the resulting creation can follow instructions. They need to be able to perform calculations, operate heavy machinery, load ammunition, maintain massive reactors, even pilot vessels, process data, repair equipment, or fight in brutal combat. Yet despite all of that conditioning, numerous accounts suggest that sometimes something unexpected actually survives. Fragments, little residual memories, echoes, or ghosts of the original person. And that possibility has absolutely terrified Imperial citizens for thousands of years. I mean, just imagine recognizing your former life. Imagine remembering your family or understanding exactly what happened to you, yet being physically incapable of resisting. Some stories claim this happens all the time. Others insist it's completely impossible. But there are several documented incidents that have really fueled this debate. One of the most famous involves malfunctioning servitors suddenly displaying traces of their former memories. We're talking names spoken completely unexpectedly, old locations recognized, or even emotional responses bubbling up during neural failures. Now, the Adeptus Mechanicus officially dismisses pretty much all of these claims, but the rumors definitely persist. And let's be real, rumors in the Imperium rarely emerge from nowhere. But the true horror of all this extends way beyond just individual suffering, because servitors are literally everywhere. Once you actually start looking for them, you realize they are deeply woven into every single level of Imperial civilization. Take an Imperial battleship, for instance. It might contain thousands of them. Some are managing life support systems. Some are calculating complex firing solutions. Some maintain the engines, while others are just hauling ammunition that weighs actual tons. Entire vessels completely depend on their labor. Without servitors, a lot of these ships would seriously struggle to even operate. And it's the exact same story on Forge worlds, hive cities, military bases, research facilities, orbital stations. Man, even in the cathedrals. In a lot of these places, everyday citizens walk past servitors without giving them a second thought. And honestly, perhaps that's the most disturbing part of this whole thing. The horror just became normal. Entire generations have simply accepted it, not necessarily because they're inherently cruel, but because the Imperium has conditioned them to view servitors as mere equipment. They're seen as tools, machines, property, definitely not people. Yet occasionally, reality kind of breaks through that conditioning. Imagine walking into a bustling manufactorum. You've got thousands of workers laboring away amid all this smoke and heavy machinery, and right there, standing near the assembly lines, is a servitor. But then someone recognizes the face. It's a neighbor, a former coworker, or maybe even a missing relative. What do you think happens then? Well, most citizens just remain silent. Speaking openly about it can be incredibly dangerous. Questioning imperial authority is dangerous enough, but questioning the Mechanicus, that can be a literal death sentence. So fear just keeps the whole system functioning. But fear alone doesn't really explain why servitors became quite this widespread. To understand that, we really have to look at the Imperium's absolute logistical nightmare. Remember, the Imperium governs a million worlds separated by just unimaginable distances in space. Communication is super unreliable. Warp travel is famously dangerous. Supply chains fail constantly, and entire sectors can just vanish from contact for years at a time. Human labor is pretty much the only truly universal resource available everywhere. And when regular human labor just isn't enough, servitors provide the ultimate solution. They require way fewer resources. They can perform incredibly dangerous tasks, tolerate high radiation, and function perfectly in toxic environments. Plus, they can be specialized for almost any purpose you can think of. From a purely strategic perspective, they are just astonishingly effective, and that sheer effectiveness explains exactly why no major imperial institution ever seriously tries to replace them. Not the Astra Militarum, not the Navy, not the Ecclesiarchy, not even many space marine chapters. And so this creates a massive moral contradiction right at the heart of the Imperium. The Imperium. On one hand, humanity claims to fight for its survival. It claims its goal is to preserve mankind. Yet on the other hand, it routinely destroys human individuality just to sustain its own empire. So is that blatant hypocrisy, or is it simply grim necessity? Honestly, the answer depends entirely on your perspective. A hive governor who's facing brutal production shortages might view servitors as absolutely essential. A tech priest, they probably view human flesh as inherently flawed anyway. An imperial commander locked in a desperate fight against orcs is going to prioritize victory over ethics every single time. But obviously, the everyday citizen who just got condemned to conversion would likely disagree, and that's where this whole situation becomes even darker. Because you see, not all servitors are built for simple labor. Some are custom-built for war. Combat servitors represent one of the absolute most terrifying applications of this technology. These cybernetic creations can carry heavy weapon systems that are way too massive for ordinary infantry. They feel absolutely zero fear, require almost minimal training, and they will follow orders relentlessly to the bitter end. But they do have weaknesses. They have very limited adaptability. Their behavior can be highly predictable, and they are completely dependent on their command structures to function. So when those command systems fail, total disaster can follow. There are several recorded Imperial engagements where damaged combat servitors just kept on firing long after the battle plans had changed. Friendly casualties piled up, operational confusion spread like wildfire. The machines were obeying exactly as they were designed to. And really, that was the entire problem because at the end of the day, blind obedience is not intelligence. Yet perhaps the absolute strangest servitors are the ones that exist within the Adeptus Mechanicus itself. Some of them are integrated directly into the infrastructure. They aren't just standing beside machines, they're literally becoming the machines. Entire sections of industrial complexes actually operate through these cybernetic human components. We're talking doors, control systems, data networks, and manufacturing lines. Sometimes the human element isn't even visible anymore, but it's still there, buried beneath layers of cold steel. I mean, imagine discovering that part of the factory around you is actually composed of transformed people. Imagine realizing that the monotone voice announcing routine instructions is actually originating from a human brain that was converted centuries earlier. Suddenly, the entire Imperium feels a lot different, right? Suddenly, every single machine becomes suspect, and that lingering suspicion naturally leads us toward the most disturbing question of all. Just how aware are servitors? Official doctrine strongly insists that awareness is extremely minimal. The necessary functions remain, sure, but individuality does not. Yet reports just keep appearing throughout Imperial history. Unexpected reactions, sudden recognition events, bizarre neural anomalies and fragments of memory, moments that officially should not exist. Now, some scholars argue these incidents are merely just technical malfunctions, but others, they believe remnants of consciousness genuinely survive in there. The truth remains uncertain, and honestly, perhaps it's kept that way intentionally. Because think about it, if the Imperium publicly confirmed that there was widespread awareness among servitors, the consequences could be catastrophic. Everyday citizens might start seeing them differently. Serious questions would emerge, resistance might grow, and if there's one thing the Imperium fears almost as much as extinction, it's instability. By now, it probably seems totally obvious that servitors represent one of the absolute cruelest institutions in all of human history. Yet a lot of Imperial defenders would argue otherwise. They'd immediately point toward massive orc invasions, terrifying stranded hive fleets, Necron awakenings, chaos incursions, and the constant threat of civilizational collapse. They would passionately argue that survival demands terrible, terrible choices, and grimly enough. They might actually have a point because the Warhammer universe rarely offers any clean moral solutions. A less brutal Imperium might also just be a weaker Imperium, and a weaker Imperium might fall. If it falls, humanity is left facing enemies fully capable of exterminating entire worlds in the blink of an eye. That is the extremely uncomfortable reality underlying the entire Servitor system. The Imperium may be monstrous for sure, but it exists in a galaxy completely filled with monsters. The debate here has never truly been about whether servitors are horrifying. I think almost everyone universally agrees that they are. The real debate is whether the Imperium believes it has any viable alternative. And after 10,000 years of endless grinding war, very few leaders seem willing to take that kind of risk. In the end, the true nightmare of becoming a servitor isn't merely the loss of your freedom. It's the complete and total loss of your identity itself, your memories stripped away, your future stolen. Your body is converted into a mere tool, and your entire existence is reduced to a single function. Yet the most chilling possibility still remains completely unresolved. What if consciousness never actually completely disappears? What if somewhere deep beneath all those implants, the harsh conditioning and the cold machinery, a tiny fragment of the original person actually survives, completely unable to speak, unable to move, unable to escape, just watching centuries slowly pass from behind cybernetic eyes? If that possibility is true, then every single servitor encountered across the vast Imperium becomes something far, far more tragic than just a machine. It becomes a prisoner. And honestly, perhaps that's exactly why so many Imperial records aggressively avoid the question altogether. It's not because they lack the answers. It's because the answers are just too dangerous, they're too uncomfortable, and they are far, far too human. Officially, of course, servitors are tools. Officially, they're deemed necessary, and officially, they are no longer people. But as we all know, official Imperial history has definitely concealed uncomfortable truths before.